Hello dear chess friends, I'm International Master Andrey Ostrovskiy and you're welcome to the lesson dedicated to the different ways of winning the material. So what does it mean? Actually, the material is the pieces and pawns. So the one who has more pieces or pawns on the board has more chances to win the game. And first and foremost, to have a chance to win opponent's pieces and pawns, you have to be active. So you actually have to attack. In this position, rook goes to d1, attacking the bishop d7, so white simply wants to capture this bishop next move. So the best defense would be probably just to go away with the bishop to prevent this. Rook takes d7, but let's have a look on the other possibility, it is rook to d8. Also typical way of defense, so the rook simply supports the bishop and is ready to recapture the rook if it takes on d7. So in such a situation, when you have other resources, so other pieces, you have to consider the second and maybe even the third wave of attack. So the bishop is protected. The question is if we have a chance to attack it again. And yes, we do. So knight goes to e5, attacking the bishop second time. And now there is a problem for black because in this concrete situation, the bishop simply can't go away. If it goes, then rook simply takes rook and white achieved the goal, so white won the material. So after this knight e5, black has to find another way to protect the bishop. It exists, so knight goes to f6. And now if we will take on d7, then it will be just an exchange because we have two attackers and black has two defenders. So to increase the pressure, we have to organize the third wave of attack. Now we have to deal with this knight f6 because it is the main defender right now, since we can't actually influence the rook on d8. So bishop goes to g5. Now we attack with all our pieces. And in fact, it becomes enough to win the material because now our threat is just to take the knight. For instance, if black plays h6, black can do any other move. Actually, it no longer matters because white simply wins material. So bishop takes f6 now, eliminating the defender. One of the most important ways of winning the material that you have to remember. And after g takes f6, white can take on d7. What is interesting, white can take on d7 with the knight, and at the same time it is also possible to take with the rook. Despite the knight is attacked, this move is great because white also attacks opponent's rook. So if black takes the knight, white wins the rook, taking it. So after rook g7, probably black has to take the rook or go away. In both cases, white has the extra minor piece as a result of the whole operation. So what is important here, you have to be active, you have to attack opponent's pieces to have a chance to win them, and you have to consider second or third or fourth wave of attack, right? So even if opponent's piece that you wanted to win is protected, maybe you have a chance to use other resources in your position to attack it more and more and more. And think of defenders. For this situation with the knight on f6 was very important to remember. So you can't attack actually the bishop, your initial target, more times. You simply have no resources, but you can deal with defenders. So attacking defendant pieces can also bring good results. So here bishop g5 was exactly the attack of the defender, so that it was indirect attack of the bishop d7. Another common way of winning the material is to find and to use the absolute pin. Like here, white plays bishop to b2, a very efficient move because this move attacks rook f6, at the same time pinning this rook to the king. It is an absolute pin, so the rook can't really move from this diagonal, and this means white will have a chance to capture this rook next move. So black simply has no defense. And in this particular case, of course, black can try the same, so bishop to b7, actually doing the absolute pin and trying to capture the rook on f3, but black's problem is that white starts first, so bishop takes f6 check. This gives black no time to take on f3, so black has to save the king now. King can't take on f6 because it is protected with the rook. By the way, don't be confused by this thing, so despite the rook is pinned, it still protects the bishop, so king can't take it. and king goes away somewhere, and white can play g4, let's say trying to unpin the rook with the help of king g3 move. And after bishop takes f3, sooner or later it should be done. King takes f3, and as a result we can see that white won the minor piece. So the initial target was rook, but in this concrete circumstances, well, it was possible to win only the minor piece, but that is enough to win the game. In this position, we deal with the absolutely symmetrical pawn structure and equal material. The only difference is that black's king no longer has the right to castle because it already moved, and white has the time to attack it. So the easiest way to attack the king is to play rook to d1, and at the moment white has even a better way to bring the rook to this position by simply doing this castling, at the same time solving the problem of the own king and coordinating both rooks. So after this check, black is in trouble, because to protect the king, black has to go away from the d-file or to cover the king with other pieces. It is not possible to play knight e7 because if rook takes d7, look, this bishop h3 just controls d7 square, so that supports the rook. In this case, white easily wins the minor piece. If knight goes to d5, well, it is a bit trickier, because at first glance, white can simply take the knight, but this will be a mistake, because if white takes the knight, then black also takes the knight on b5, and it appears just an exchange, so white wins no material here. So instead of doing it, white has to realize that the knight is now pinned to the king. It is the absolute pin and already attacked, so it is not possible to save the knight. So to win the material here, white has to go away with the own knight from b5, which is attacked somewhere on c3, let's say, and next move white will easily capture the knight on d5, again winning the material. So what happens after the king moves away from the d-file? There is only one square to go away, because square c8 is controlled by the bishop from h3, square c7 is controlled by the knight from b5, and king has hence only e8 square, after which there is no longer control over c7 square, and knight b5 can occupy it. And that is another common way of winning the material, so to make a fork. So the knight simply checks the king and at the same time attacks the rook on a8. The king has to go away, after which white simply takes the rook, winning the material. So the fork is just a version of the general weapon, which is called the double attack. So in this position, we can see that white has more space, more active pieces at the moment, and can use the double attack to win the material. So queen goes to d3. At the moment, we can notice that the knight attacks h7. The queen also joins this attack, so there is a threat of a checkmate. At the same time, this queen attacks the knight on a6, which is not protected. So the great way of finding tactics like this is just to understand which pieces in the opponent's camp lack a defense, not protected at the moment, so that they might be your potential targets. So queen d3 attacking two spots in black's camp, and black simply has no defense. There is no move protecting both things simultaneously. If black tries to save the knight with the help of c4, then queen takes h7 with the checkmate. If black, let's say, counterattacks the knight g5 with the h6, it also leads to checkmate on h7. And finally, if black protects the king and plays something like g6, white can take the knight on a6, winning the material. So double attack is the way to win the material. You just create two threats simultaneously, and in many cases your opponent simply has no move covering two vulnerable spots. Another interesting and common way of winning the material is simply to trap opponent's piece. So in this position, white starts with the queen a8 move. Very interesting idea, creating a threat of knight d5 fork. So black has to do something with this threat, and it appears that, well, for example, the queen can't go away somewhere, because the only square after queen a8 that black's queen can occupy is c7, but c7 square is bad because it still leads to a fork after knight d5, attacking the king and attacking the queen simultaneously. We already saw this method. So to prevent this knight d5, the king has to go away somewhere, but after that the knight goes to d5 anyway, and the queen is surprisingly trapped. So the queen is attacked, right? There is a threat to capture it. And look, the knight controls c7 square, and now white's queen controls this b7 and c6 squares, as well as squares like a5, a6, a7, b8, and d8. So all possible squares that queen could have occupied, because other squares are engaged with own pieces, so queen actually can't occupy them as well. So the queen is trapped and white wins the material. Sometimes you can win material even defending your position. So in this position, black decided to play c6, a very natural idea because knight d5 is very active, and it is just natural to try to get rid of this knight, just to try to kick away it from this great position on d5. And white, instead of going away with the knight, decided to attack a vulnerable spot in black's position. So white played rook f3, creating a threat of queen takes f7 with the idea of winning the rook on e6 if black takes the knight. For instance, c takes d5, queen takes f7, check, forcing the king to h8, and queen takes e6, winning the material because white sacrificed the knight but won the rook, so white has the extra exchange. Instead of taking on d5, of course, black decided to protect f7 pawn, and there are usually several methods of doing it, and the best one here is just to play knight e5, because it is not only the defense of the f7 square, but at the same time the counterattack. So the knight attacks the rook on f3, at the same time the knight on d5 is still attacked, and for example the move like knight f6 doesn't really help. Yes, it is check, it delays the losing of the material, but the king goes to g7 here, counterattacking this knight again, and now white definitely loses material because again the knight is attacked, the rook is attacked, and next move some of these pieces will drop. So as you can see, sometimes you can combine defense with the counterattack, and this also can help you to win the material. And this example is the great demonstration of the power of counterattack in the sense of winning the material. So in this situation, black's turn to move, and black already has extra material, but in fact, there are a lot of hanging pieces, so black is in trouble. For example, the rook is under attack, and if rook goes away, let's say to d8, then white takes on c6 with check, forcing the only defense rook to d7, after which white simply regains the missing material by taking on c3, and white has an overwhelming position because there is a great problem with completing the development, and white already has the extra pawn. If queen goes to d8, the things go even worse because of the same queen c6 check, forcing the queen to d7. Now white grabs the rook with check, again forcing the queen to the only position on d8, and after exchange of queens and taking on c3, white has the extra rook. So it looks like it is a great problem for black to save the material here, but there is a possibility to counterattack. So knight goes to d5 check. This gives white a chance to protect the king with the tempo after bishop d2 attacking the queen. So now the queen and the rook are attacked, so queen d8 doesn't help because of queen takes c6. We already saw this possibility. So for example, queen d8, queen c6, queen d7 is forced, and now queen takes a8 wins the material for white. So instead of doing it, black came up with a great idea. So queen went to b6 first, forcing the queen to grab a8 rook. King goes to d7 now, and all of a sudden white is in trouble because the queen on a8 is just completely constrained, and black has a direct threat of trapping the queen with the help of knight c7 move. And at the same time, the knight controls f4 square, so that, for example, white has no chance to play bishop there to control c7 square. So black decided to sacrifice the part of the material and to come up with the counterattacks. And now white is in trouble already. The game went castling, knight went to c7. Fortunately, white found the way to save the queen with the help of counterattack as well. Bishop went to a5. And now the point is that if queen takes the bishop, then queen achieves this b7 square to go away, but knight simply took on a8, and after bishop b6 and knight b6, we can see that black has the knight and the bishop against the rook, which is considered a material advantage. Thanks a lot for your attention. See you in next lessons.